By the killings of 6 hostages in Gaza, protests continued in Israel to pressure the government to enter an urgent truce deal in Israel. On a day of nationwide strikes, protesters blocked a highway in central Tel Aviv, continuing their overnight protests in which at least 500,000 people took to the streets in major cities.
Israel is under siege. With massive protests on the streets and strike calls paralyzing work in major cities of the country, on Monday schools were closed and municipal services remained shut for several hours. While the Ben Gurion International Airport near Tel Aviv was operating as usual, takeoffs were halted for 2 hours. The mass action is all part of the efforts to pressure the government to seek an immediate ceasefire in Gaza after the military recovered 6 bodies of hostages on Sunday. Israel says post-mortem examinations showed the 6 were murdered with close-range gunshots by Hamas. But relatives and demonstrators accuse Prime Minister Netanyahu's government of not doing enough to bring the hostages back alive.
There are still 101 hostages being held. 6 were alive last week, from what I understand, at least up until 48 hours before they were executed in captivity. So I hold everyone accountable, him, along with every stakeholder in the negotiation process.
On Monday in Jerusalem and some other cities, life appeared to go on as usual. But some private companies, like public transportation providers, partially suspended operations in support of the strike. Labor union Histadrut said it wanted to stop the abandonment of the hostages. It added only its intervention can shake those who need to be shaken. It was an apparent reference to the Israeli decision-makers, who they say are opposing a truce. 251 hostages were taken captive by Hamas on October 7. So far, Israeli forces have been able to rescue only 8 alive. Scores were released during a 1-week truce in November, the only one so far.
Today, I urge my government and all the states of the world to make a deal, make it possible, make it happen. It's too late for us, it's too late for Carmel. I will never hug her again. But 101 people can still hug their families. For them, make the deal, save lives.
US President Joe Biden says he is still optimistic of a deal. The US is grappling with the fallout, recalibrating its negotiation efforts after the death of US Israeli Hirsch Goldberg Poland, one of the 6 dead hostages. Biden has said Hamas will pay for its crimes. Israel, however, is not letting up in its strikes in Gaza. Monday, the fighting coincided with the second day of localized humanitarian pauses to facilitate a vaccination drive, after the first confirmed polio case in 25 years, with the growing public anger on one hand and reports of the US planning to present a take-it-or-leave-it truce deal to the warring parties. It remains to be seen how the discovery of the deaths of the hostages will impact the possibility of the urgently needed ceasefire.
While the protests to pressure the Israeli government to make a truce deal highlights only one aspect of the issue, there is also a deep-seated apprehension among other sectors that accepting such a deal would only embolden Hamas. Our correspondent Jody Cohen has this report from Renana in Israel.
I'm I'm at one of 15 protests taking place across the country, and you can see protesters behind me have blocked the streets. There's also a general strike with the aim of putting pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to agree to Hamas's demands in the talks. However, not everyone agrees, and at least 14 local authorities have refused to participate. That's because some people believe that if Israel capitulates to Hamas, it would put Israel at risk and encourage Hamas to take future hostages. So what's left of the talks? President Biden and Vice President Harris are reportedly sitting with their negotiators on Monday regarding a final take-it-or-leave-it proposal. A U.S. official has reportedly said that Hamas's execution of the 6 hostages casts doubt on Hamas's seriousness about reaching a deal. Prime Minister Netanyahu has confirmed that his government would continue to negotiate. Meanwhile, he also called for a strong reaction to Hamas's executions in order, he said, to prevent more murders of hostages. This is Jodie Cohen for WION World as One.
For more on this, we are now being joined by retired Colonel Rich Outson from Washington, D.C. He's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and the Jamestown Foundation. Rich, welcome back to WION. What do you make of this massive protest that's taking place in Israel, and what kind of pressure is on the Israeli government, not only from these protests, but it appears the Biden administration is also pressuring Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu?
It's good to be with you. Yes, I think the pressure is reflective in Israel, the domestic pressure of broad dissatisfaction with the course of the war. It's been going on almost 11 months now. The political strategy clearly is not working. And by that, I mean the idea of an extended low-intensity conflict. Most of Gaza is not occupied by the Israelis right now. They went in with force, but they haven't stayed, meaning that Hamas has been able to reassert control in portions of the Strip. And the idea that the continued conduct of military operations can save the hostages has been disappointed by the recent executions by Hamas of these 6. So what you see is both the left and the right of the political spectrum in Israel basically saying this is not working. The left saying make a deal, take half a loaf, as the saying goes, in order to save the hostages, and we'll revisit this when we need to, even if it means Hamas survives. On the right, they say you haven't gone hard enough, and we still have too many countries supporting Hamas. Take the gloves off. But nobody's happy with what's happened so far. And as you say, that's coupled with international pressure on Israel from the U.S. and elsewhere to bring this to a conclusion.
The Biden administration, it appears, plans to present what it terms as a take-it-or-leave-it Israel-Gaza ceasefire deal. Do we know what that's about, and how much of it has to do, once again, with preventing Israel from going into places like Rafah, where these executed hostages were found?
Well, I think describing a U.S. negotiating position as take it or leave it implies leverage that it's not, probably doesn't really have, and certainly isn't willing to exercise either over Israel or over Hamas. If the U.S. says, okay, they've left it, so I'm not going to negotiate anymore, I don't see that as realistic. On the other hand, if Israel says no and Hamas says yes, does that mean the U.S. starts sanctioning Israel? I don't think that's going to happen either. If Hamas says no and Israel says yes, does that mean we participate in the military campaign? So in a sense, I think it's just an ad campaign to say it's a take it or leave it. Negotiations will continue. At the crux of this is Israeli continued control over Philadelphia corridor. That's the strip of land between Gaza, Rafah, as you mentioned, and Egypt. Because if the Israelis pull out of that, Hamas will be able to resuscitate its military capabilities over time. If Israel stays there, that will be much more difficult. In other words, keeping Philadelphia corridor really is central to saying who won this round of warfare between Hamas and Israel. And that's one of the reasons that Netanyahu is so loath, even at the cost of lives of hostages, to make that concession.
Okay. Well, Rich, thank you so much for all of that. Of course, we'll be following this story very closely. It was a very tragic weekend. We're going to see how the Biden administration and, of course, Israel and Hamas decide to proceed. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.